All right, so questions, thoughts? Yes, it just fell off, so I'm reattaching.
So you said you did this research, which year?
Yeah, so I can talk about that. I have a method slide. Here we go. What do we do? Okay. So the gender and culture in Indian IT was 2003. Oh, I didn't put the dates on the other one. 2003 through 2008, 2009. And then the commercial microfinance stuff, mostly collected in 2012, more in 2016. And this I've been really staying on top of it because I'm still writing about it. So I've been keeping up with kind of some of the changes since demonetization and stuff like that.
So unfortunately, 2003 to 2008 and we're in 2019. And I just want to tell you that I've spent 25 years in IT.
Yeah.
And not much has changed.
Yeah.
Probably we'll find that really not much has moved in the industry for women there. Yeah.
That's really unfortunate. And unfortunately, that was my hunch, because when I was initially, when I was thinking about this talk, I was like, oh, it's kind of old, like, what should I say? And then when I looked at the NASCOM, like the new industry report, the stuff that was coming out, I'm like, I actually think some of these things that women were saying then, they might say now too, in the same positions. So that in itself is significant, right, and suggests that the kind of approaches that have been tried, that something radically different has to be tried to make that shift.
So yeah. I believe because of UN's 2030 goals of sustainable development,
yeah.
the whole paradigm is changing right now.
Yeah.
Moments of change right now. And the reason for that is that we have to meet those goals, otherwise we'll be shamed for not doing that.
Yeah.
And now the problem statements have changed. So one of the things what UNDP has come up with is that a lot of companies like Coca-Cola or Pepsi, all these companies are coming to UNDP and telling that now we want the whole manufacturing to be just done by women in certain parts of the country.
Yep.
And that problem statement started this organization called C-Trade, where what we're trying to collate is that we would now go ahead and create a structure in place that if tomorrow Starbucks comes or some of these organizations come to me that I want to source all my products only from this women-based organization. So when we're talking about women-based organization, we're talking from harvesting to transportation to storage to the end-to-end delivery of the raw products. And
right.
reason why we would have to give women equal rights and equal opportunity for that is farming has been male-driven work, which is only on paper, but underlying like women is working
for free, unpaid labor.
For free.
Yep.
And
yep.
because we need to change this whole shift, because you would be shamed for it. Now there are a lot of people who are doing a lot of work, and that's the place where microfinancing is coming into play, because what this microfinancing are doing is they're not only giving these opportunities, but they're also making them, these organizations or enterprises, and so that maybe the quality is something which you're still working on, but at least you have something on paper. And now when you have something on paper, it's easier to expand than having all these ideas in place or having it at very small scale.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to hear about all of those things. I mean, I would add to that I think for that scale, you actually need something like SME financing, like small and medium enterprise financing. The micro is very micro, right?
So I also, because I have been, into this, and the problem with SME is that it's a male-driven society.
Yes.
And the problem over there is that we do not see that there is some business which is going to come from women, because at the end my stakeholders are male, my investors are male, everybody in this economy is male. So, and there's no one who's a decision maker, like even if you're seeing from a managerial point of view, not even a single woman out there who's a woman. So who's actually going to put their views forward.
Right.
And so microfinance is saying that we have stretched it really hard, and you need to now take it to the SME level, where SMEs now need to come into and take this baton from us and make some progress. But that is not happening because SMEs don't care about 2040 goals, they care about the profit.
Right. Yeah. No, but there's some interesting connections that can be made there, because I think it is about, if that fantasy of entrepreneurship is to happen, then that jump needs to happen, right? I'm not sure if microfinance will be the driver for it, right? Maybe, I'd love to sort of look into more detail where that's worked out in that way, but you need a little more money. Like the microfinance, the seed money is so small, and generally the larger loans go to repeat customers who have been there for many, many years, and what those older customers tend to use them for consumption purposes and not for entrepreneurial purposes. That's what some of the industry data says. That's borne out in some of the ethnographic work that I've done. maybe there's been a change and there's some and I mean, India is just so endlessly diverse that, you know, what's true in Tamil Nadu may not be true in Kerala, and like somehow in Kerala they're making that, you know, so it's entirely possible. I'm not saying no, but you know, microfinance is there's a lot of innovation happening in that space where, you know, they're trying to change the terms and the size of those loans. So if it opens up, you know, there's possibilities for it. But in the end, it's just another kind of finance, right? And there's only so much that it can do without addressing these other structures, right? I think there's a lot of opportunity in the SME space to transform the gender politics of it, right? There's some organizations that are doing that.
Some organizations actually remove the SMEs and microfinance out of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this organization called Industry, which what they're trying to do is create this sustainable furniture, which is actually being sent to IKEA. So IKEA is using it, and this whole products of artisan and art, like all this work of wood and all these things, are actually created completely by women. And they're doing sales worth 1 million. Now, when you're doing those kind of sales, you know, IKEA makes it a point that by 2030 we have to reach certain target, which needs to be sustainable as well as, you know, equal workplace. So these are changing, but then entrepreneurs have to come into play.
That's right.
Where seed funding and everything is just gone, and you're more about how you're putting money into it.
Yeah, no, and there's a lot of connections in that, but that's really interesting. Yeah.
So the data shows that there has been a decline in women workforce post 90s. Kind of after the markets opened up.
Yes.
So then, what kind of relation is good? I mean, I would like to know your analysis of the market economy playing its role in India as opposed to an open market playing its role in the US probably.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I'm not a demographer, and there's some papers that are coming out that are trying to explain this thing, right? So, let me go back so we can look at that, right? So it starts to dip, and you're exactly right? It corresponds with liberalization, right? It is when it starts to dip, right? And then it kind of picks up again, and then it like tanks in the mid 2000s, right? And so, you know, so someone just sent me a paper about this that I haven't had a chance to read, because this data is fairly new, but people have been trying to think about it. I think a lot of it has to do with what's going on in rural India. That's what the demographers are saying. But certainly there is something about, you know, liberalization and neoliberal policies that have transformed work opportunities for women, not for necessarily for the better, at least in the long term, right? Because it seems to have had some positive effect temporarily, and then there's a huge drop-off after that. So I think it's an empirical question. The way that I framed it was kind of from a broader sense of just thinking about what are some of the economies that have come out of neoliberal policies and out of liberalization, and they have been these two ends of it. But there's obviously more going on than that, and so it requires a little more investigation.
My point of view was that for instance, a lot of Marxists would argue that patriarchy and capitalism go hand in hand.
Yes.
So then how would dynamics work with that?
So,
if you can suggest some reading.
Right, no, I see what you're saying. So, yeah, I mean, the way that capitalism has kind of been unleashed in a neoliberal, you know, post-90s, then, you know, you could see a strengthening of patriarchy in many ways. And so, you know, I talked briefly about respectability politics, right? There might be ways in which the new forms of capitalism that have been articulated post-millennium have actually encouraged and strengthened some of those structures. You know, and that's a broad understanding. The devil's in the details, right? So in particular contexts, that may play out differently. And we may not be able to trace that, right, macro thing to this macro thing, but it's theoretically a very strong possibility, and something that I'm always thinking about. So thank you for that. Yeah.
See, from this data, these data that you have put forth, I don't think that the you know, level of unemployment among women started declining from the 90s. I'm an economist. I used to write in financial papers. And I've been studying this question of employment for quite some years.
Okay, then you'll have much more expertise.
Actually, if you look at it, it's around 2005
Yes.
that the dip starts. Now, from the data that I have seen, and this includes the US Labor of Statistics,
Yeah.
They did a study in 2010, I think, which went back from 2005 onwards, which is the period of very high growth in India during the Congress regime.
Yeah.
And they showed, surprisingly, that actually the level of compensation among factory workers, which includes both women and men,
Yes.
had started declining.
Oh.
Second, Indian official data also showed that actually the level of employment per se,
Yeah.
that is for both men and women, it started declining
Declining overall.
during the period of very high growth. So it almost is like as if the graphs are moving in the opposite direction.
Yes.
Like inversely related.
Right.
So growth had nothing to do with the employment.
Exactly.
So my point actually is that
Yeah.
when you look at women's employment, I'm not making a normative judgment here.
Yeah.
I'm just making a sort of factual, I'm trying to be as factual as possible. But the problem is that actually if you see the world today and in India in particular, the level of employment in general is declining drastically.
Yes. For sure.
And you mentioned something called flexi employment.
Yes.
It is one of the most pernicious things.
Absolutely.
You mentioned capitalism.
Absolutely.
And it is the most pernicious form of employment. That
Couldn't agree more.
First of all, it's growing rapidly in the EU. It's growing rapidly in England.
And in the US.
And in the US. And there's no social security.
Yep.
There are no benefits. And you get this illusion that actually you are employed, but and that you're getting a very high pay because you don't have to then, as somebody once told me, that these kids don't have to pay any. There are no tax cuts, and there's nothing like provident fund. You don't have to save anything. You just go and enjoy yourself with a huge pay packet. But
You're more vulnerable. Exactly.
So my point is that with this kind of structure of unemployment, which
Yes.
is growing
Yes.
all over.
Yes. Absolutely.
What happens is the binaries that you were talking of. My sense is that there is a rather pernicious game being played by multinationals.
By corporate, yeah. It's a lot about corporate
Because
power.
what they're saying is, you know what? We know we are progressive companies because we are concerned about women. So what we'll do is that we'll employ women only. And then there is a legitimization of a certain form of exploitation
Absolutely.
that is given the veneer of a certain sustainability of the women who need work.
And it's a little bit of a savior complex too, right? Like you can, we're doing this great thing for the women.
It's like what somebody called John Oliver, that talk show guy
Yeah.
called native advertising, right?
Yes.
So it's like, Pepsi or Coke or Levi jeans, is going to employ only women, nobody else.
Right.
And so.
Right, and that doesn't, and
Hallelujah.
yeah,
So-
and I mean, so when you go to these so just to follow up on things were all really helpful points, because first of all, the point about as employment, as the economy does better, doesn't mean that it's necessarily helping folks. And in the U.S., you have this other dynamic, which is that although the overall unemployment rate is low because of flexi work, because of the gig economy, right? Folks are underemployed within that, and the low unemployment rate masks vast levels of underemployment, right?
Actually, what happens is that drives, coming back to your point of the disempowerment of women,
Yeah,
which is historically given, gets actually perpetuated even more.
absolutely.
Because now what happens is that me, a male, is going to fight for a job with the female. And I'm going to say, listen, you sit at home because
Right.
I need the job more than you do. So what happens is that this whole deepening crisis of capitalism, in fact, perpetuates a social inequality that was historically given.
Yeah.
And we don't seem to see that. Because I'm sorry to say this, but I feel that when the feminist looks at the question of women empowerment solely from the viewpoint of women empowerment, the deeper structural problem of what actually causes the schism between man and woman tends to get overlooked.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that was kind of why I was talking about these binaries in a more structural fashion, that if we're not rethinking masculinities and femininities, regardless of the gender of the body that we're talking about, then we're never going to kind of get to the root of it. And in the kind of women's empowerment paradigms that have been trotted out are largely individualistic. They never look at the social, they never look at the structural. And so they're never going to address any of these broader structural issues. And I think some of the connections with the crises of capitalism, with the global economy, they're absolutely crucial for being able to think about, what new paradigms are. And we don't, there's not a lot of scope for that kind of thinking. I mean, that's a hard thing to dive into in a meme or in a little soundbite. It requires a lot more deep thinking, and we're unfortunately in a moment where folks...
I think we need to think through this whole development discourse. I mean,
absolutely.
We talk about the neoliberal discourse.
Yeah.
And I think development discourse predates it.
Yes, and they merged at some point.
Yeah, and they merged at, in the 90s.
Exactly.
So on, and I think that,
very pernicious.
I'm sorry to look at so many youngsters whose life is going to get rather tenuous now, given the level of unemployment that's going to increase. I mean, it's going to get even tougher.
Yeah.
As we go.
And going back to your point about male unemployment, men's unemployment in India, I mean that's also just at a historic. I mean it's just gotten so out of so disproportionate. Another sociologist, Raka Ray, whom I've studied with, who's at UC Berkeley, she recently gave a talk. She's been studying kind of service work and training among men and women in sort of tier 2 cities, right, especially in the Northeast. And she's looking at Allahabad and a couple of interesting cities. And she, what's that?
I said, wow.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so during the course of her field work, she was following up with a job posting for a clerk level position in the government, a government job, clerk level position, right? And there were something like, I hope I can remember these numbers, there was something like 6 positions that were available, and they received something like 250,000 applications for those 6 jobs, many of whom had PhDs, right? So if that's not like a historic, catastrophic level
the most famous
crisis.
Thing is in the railways, there was
Yeah.
this news item, right? I mean, lakhs and lakhs of people, and PhDs and postgraduates.
Right. Wanting to do the job of a clerk,
Yeah.
right?
And it goes back to the discussion on the discourse itself.
Yes.
Because, the assumption is, and industrialists peddle this to MA students. I mean, I've been a teacher and I've always felt terrible about telling them that actually the best way for growth is to see productivity increases and technology takes over. I mean, technology is taking over
everybody's jobs. Yeah. And we haven't. That's another thing. I mean, that's a different talk. But right, rethinking work. Like, what is work going to be, right? And what's going to be valued.
That this decline could be because of automation.
Yeah, it is. In America, it is. I mean,
In the U.S., this curve looks different, I think. But I haven't looked. But
there's just one. Then I'll stop. I mean, this one. You had said something that intrigued me a bit. About microfinance being a kind of fantasy or something.
Yeah.
Did I hear you?
Yeah. It did. Well, I talked to. There is a microfinance fantasy out there.
I was just wondering what you would have to say about Muhammad Yunus, who began it all. I mean, would you say that in Bangladesh, for instance,
Yeah.
was it also a kind of fantasy?
So the Bangladesh model is very different than what's happened in India. for one thing. There's a very particular context for that. And what has happened in Bangladesh, there have been excoriating critiques of it. I can't say that it's been, I don't know what defines success in that context, right? Has there been a transformation in rural life in Bangladesh as a result of microfinance? Without a doubt. Has all of that been, to the benefit of women and their livelihoods? I'm, as a scholar of this area who's read the literature, unclear on that myself. I've read, accounts that are very supportive of that and trot out extensive data, and I've read some really disturbing accounts, if even half of which are true, would make me very uncomfortable with seeing that as a model. And in India, there isn't even any pretense of trying to copy the Bangladesh case, because it's so different. It's completely different. The way that it's unfolded, starting with the self-help groups and then moving on to the commercial microfinance sector, the entire way that it's unfolded is just so dramatically different. And I think that fantasy that we have comes from Bangladesh. Lamia Karim has written this excoriating, critique of Grameen, and one anecdote from that comes to mind is, the woman who, Eunice's first borrower, who's often, in the early kind of, 90s representations of microfinance. That borrower, I wish I could remember her name. She had a name and everything. When Karim went to do her research and went and found this woman, she was living in desperate poverty and actually had been marginalized from her entire community, right? And she had not been able to pass on any of the gains from the business that she had set up to her children. Right, that it had been very short term, and ultimately it hadn't overcome the other kinds of marginalization that she was facing in her community. So, and that's not to undermine some of the amazing things that have happened, but it's not the full story, that there is a part of it that is quite fantastical, and that we need to ground with further context and further understanding. And, if there's one thing that I take away from working on microfinance and trying to get my mind around it these many years, is that just the term itself is misleading, because it's not the same thing everywhere, right? It doesn't mean what microfinance means in Bangladesh is not the same thing that it means in Latin America, is not the same thing it means in India, is not the same thing it means in the US. They're entirely different products, entirely different contexts, and we need an analytical frame for thinking about them. We don't really have it. The term hides more than it reveals, right? And so we actually, I think in India, we should just think about it as another form of finance, of subprime. It's subprime finance.
Actually, it's another form of money lending.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and it seems, the current government is propelling it very vehemently. The Modi government of microfinance stuff for rural sectors, for rural.
Yeah, I have to look.
It's high on the agenda.
Right, I'm sure. Well, and that's because commercial microfinance has been so successful in India in terms of its growth, in terms of its profitability. It's hugely complex, and they're in with the banks. So the way that where it's different from money lending, at least the way that it's developed in India, is that it's very deeply embedded in the banking system. So Indian banks have this priority lending sector, this PLS designation, right? All of it goes to MFIs now, right? And so MFIs build up their, they have to raise equity, they have to raise debt capital. They get all, I forget which one. One of them, their debt capital all comes from PLF, from other Indian banks. Right? And so in some way, Indian banks are offloading their responsibility to serve the majority of the population to this other industry that serves them at very high interest rates. Right, but offers them, that are supposed to be sustainable. There's a lot of debate about the interest rates, but it's essentially stratified finance, right? So those folks are accepting terms that most of us in this room could never live with, would never take money on those terms, right? But that's what is being offered. So when you look at it in that way, the micro part is not so important, right? It's the terms, and it's just one more form of finance.
It never was. It never was. The moment, who's that? I forget his name now.
Akula. Vikram Akula at SKS. Yep.
Vikram Akula's idea of microfinance was to raise money in the capital market.
Yeah, well, they've all gone on. See, Akula is the first guy who had that idea, but essentially all of them have gone public at this point.
That, there's a conflict of interest. Mm-hmm. What happens is that instead of serving the beneficiary of microfinance, you are actually serving your shareholders.
That's right. But they're very open about that. They're not. They've even when I went into it thinking.
There's nothing to hide in it.
That's right. They don't even worry. They don't even trot out social good niceties anymore.
Shareholder value.
Yep.
That
The CEOs, I've interviewed them, they're mainly concerned with giving entry-exit to investors. That's mainly what they are concerned with.
Just have a moderate.
No, it doesn't work for the poor, whether it's a woman or it's anybody else.
Yeah, so it doesn't
Woman
serve
even
the-
less.
The ignorance of the strata of the.
Because if I am running the microfinance company, I want to make sure my shareholders get their value, which means better payout, buddy. Else I'm taking your house.
Kushru.
That's why in Andhra Pradesh they banned microfinance.
Yeah, Andhra Pradesh, there was also this standoff between the World Bank pumped lots of money into the SHG's expansion. So the state was giving out a lot of money, and then the MFIs were being very aggressive. And so in that early 2000s period, there was no difference between the for-profit guys and the non-for-profit guys. They were competing for the same clients and basically shoving all this subprime finance down the throats of, folks who were not equipped to take that up. So that perpetuated the crisis. And I mean, I went into it thinking, oh, nonprofit microfinance is cool, but it's the for-profit that's the problem. They're virtually indistinguishable when you get into the details of it. They're just so enmeshed with each other, at least in India, right? Other parts of the world, other contexts it could be, but in India, they're absolutely enmeshed with each other, and you can't disentangle them. And so that's also really, problematic and hard to wrap your mind around because there's just so much going on. Kushru.
Thanks for actually bringing this up because, about 10 years ago I read Mohammad Yunus's book and you think it's the greatest thing
Yes.
cut bread.
Yes.
Bread. So I've got kind of two questions for you. One is, why does microfinance in the general layman, like
Yes.
layman in the scale,
Yeah.
why does it seem like it's a do-gooder?
Yeah.
Why do they have that image?
Yeah.
Is it because of Yunus? And secondly, frankly, what's wrong if they're running a business? They're running a business. Why are we beating up on them? I mean,
Right. The commercial MFI guys. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So two questions.
they have that image.
Yeah.
Of being do-gooders.
Yes.
And if they're a business, they're like any other business. They take opportunity
That's right.
of, Coca-Cola does
Yep.
that, Cadbury's
Yep.
does that, every FMCG does that. They
Yep.
take advantage of the poor to grow their base.
That's right. So yeah, those are great questions. So in response to the first question, I have a different talk about this, but in the U.S., there's Kiva.org is really big. I don't know how many people have heard about that. They have a version of Rangde here is the same thing. So this idea, Rangde is actually different, very different than Kiva. So I shouldn't compare them to because Rangde connects with different kinds of organizations. But Kiva, right? This idea that you can. I think the reason for its appeal, right, is that it seems like you are fueling self-sufficiency, which is very appealing in a neoliberal context, right? All of us want to empower individuals to help themselves. And there's a way in which microfinance promotes that very strongly and seems moral just because of the very neat storyline. It's just hard to find fault with. It's like the teach a woman to fish, teach a man to fish kind of thing. It has that idea. It had that ideological bent to it, and I think that has a very wide audience that depoliticizes any kind of dissent or critique or anything like that. It's like, well, what could be wrong with it? You're just helping people become self-sufficient. So I think that's why it seems to, no matter how many critical perspectives, no matter how much data is brought against it to say, this is really not what we thought it is, people just kind of doggedly insist that it's miraculous because there is a simplicity to the logic of, you give someone a loan, you get it back, it's so great that people really love it. And then quickly in response to the other question, I think you're absolutely right. And in defense of MFIs, I don't think they're as awful as as they could be made out to be. I don't think that they're the enemy in any way. I actually think the Indian, through regulation, offloaded the responsibility of, bringing a large segment of the population into the sphere of credit. They've kind of offloaded it to these private companies. And they have, for better or worse, more or less done that, right? They've kind of created the discipline of lending and borrowing and repaying among a base of folks that weren't doing that before, right? With pros and cons, vast generalization.
Is there a interest rate regulation on these?
Yes, there's a cap at 26%. 26%, yes. And yeah, really, and there's a backstory there too, which is that essentially the MFIs themselves, after the crisis, got together and told the RBI what the cap should be. So just let that one sink in for a second. Oh, great. Great.
So some of the challenges that you put out for in microfinance
Yeah.
don't affect just the women, they affect the men.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And for whatever it's worth, microfinance is actually, so I've worked very closely with the poor in Pune,
Uh-huh.
the urban poor,
Yeah.
and really it's made a lot of difference to women, to families,
Yeah.
hundreds.
Yeah.
Hundreds. And so in spite of the problems of microfinance,
Yes.
there is no other alternative for women. So there is a certain cost associated with
Yes.
providing microfinance.
Absolutely.
You and I will not go into those slums and get people to actually come together as a group and support each other.
Yes, and it's difficult to do that. It's very laborious.
There's that you can find online also why a microfinance
Is expensive.
rate is that high. So I just felt that the problems were not women specific. It affected the men too.
Yes.
A couple of other observations. One about gender jobs.
Yeah.
Actually, across the world, there are also gender jobs where males are preferred or males apply.
Yes.
So word over, where danger is there, it's always the males who are ending up taking the job. There are hardly any women who apply for these jobs, like firefighting, sewage cleaning, oil rigs. So I think it's a little more complex than saying gender because it can exist in other countries. It's everywhere.
Yeah, I have a slide about that too. So, so yes, it's not specific to
And
India.
it's also not just female gender, it's also jobs that are gendered against men.
Yes, yeah, and I agree in both ways. This talk was about women's work, but there's absolutely...
In mainstream, there's hardly any talk about, because I think we have to start looking at both so that we can come to a certain equitable solution that works.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. And when I'm talking about sex segregated work, I'm talking about men's work, work that's there is men's work too, and not all of that is great work, right? Most of the examples that I gave.
Also expats across the world when they travel, it's always one spouse that has to leave, and in most of the cases it's women across the world, not just in India, who will give up their careers to travel.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. This was an India talk, but absolutely. No, thank you. That's very helpful for additional context.
What you mentioned was that the jobs at the lowest levels, also at so many petrol pumps here, the gas stations, I'm seeing more women being employed to dispense,
Mm-hmm.
So that's one positive
Yeah.
thing that change has come about. Also, as security guards,
Yes.
I see a lot of women being
Yes.
employed. So that's a positive thing.
There's a really interesting book about that by Nandini Gupta. She's interviewed women security guards. There's an really good ethnographic project. She's based in the UK.
One friend of mine, he's my child friend, he's working with this cash logistics movement called Drinks.
Okay.
So he is the one who initiated this, that more women should be employed, but they should be refrained from the physical lifting of the trunks.
Right.
Huge this thing that physical labor is required.
Yeah.
But other than that, they should be.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. That's
Yeah.
good, as long as employability is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Okay, yes.
So, India and caste cannot
Yes.
be on different pages.
Yes,
The reason
yes.
I raise it is that when we're talking about workplace policies, I'll give you like some hardcore facts.
Yeah.
One of the facts is that when you're working in garment industry, the kind of women who work is from 12 to 18 years of age.
Yes.
Because then you're disposed of and you get married
Yep.
and you're actually disposed of.
Yes.
In the sense.
Yes.
The working conditions are that you ensure that the drinking water has some menstrual pills into it so that your period cycle is lowered or it's smaller than actual.
Yeah.
The second is that you keep this washroom so unhygienic that these women don't go and use those washrooms.
Yeah.
And you don't give them wages on time.
Right. It's structured that
for
way.
Men as well as women.
Yeah.
And the conditions are like that 12-hour shifts go on. So the woman will sleep for 12 hours and will work for 12 hours. And the same place will be shared by two women.
Oh
so
my
at
gosh.
The same place. And
So they can work around the clock. Yeah.
And the reason why I'm asking is that because the working is so tedious, you might have women entrepreneurs who might come up from Dalit sector,
Yes.
the underprivileged part of the world, and we have stories around that. And second is
Yeah.
with respect to the organized sector where white collar jobs go
Yeah.
on. The issue over there with feminism is that when a woman is given cap at 8 p.m., usually because it's late in India, and so for the safety you give them cabs, and men usually used to get cabs, but now because of the cost, you have to ensure the cost is in place. You would say that women would get cabs and men wouldn't get cabs, and these kind of scenarios what underplays that you're always getting an additional benefit to just come to work, so at least you come and work, and that kind of mentality.
That kind of mentality, the pushback,
because,
right?
Because when we're talking about feminism, the only reason why we are also talking about is we're talking from equality point of view.
Right.
There is the F word which we do not want to use at any forums.
Right.
As soon as you say feminism, like all the men would just shut their ears.
Right. Yeah.
And so that the reason why I'm asking is that maybe you have more research on that.
About the specific policies, and you mean in IT specifically?
Not IT specifically, but in general, like how can you make it more equitable where we understand why something is done, and that is very important.
I mean, I think there can be conversation is really powerful, right? I mean, why are the cabs in the show? There's so many. I actually have heard a lot of stories about transport, particularly. I think it's a very it's a site of a lot of gender politics, right? In transport, particularly at night. If women aren't offered night transport, then they'll never get any of the interesting projects, right? They'll never be engaged in any of that kind of work. And then even if they are offered it, like if they have to have recently I was at the conference I was just at, an IT worker was saying at her workplace, they have this rule that a man has to escort. A colleague has to come with them, and if you live far away, then it's a huge inconvenience for that one. And even if they don't say anything, then the woman will think twice, should I really take up this project because I'm burdening somebody else? And right, so there's a lot to unpack there. But I mean, I think having more conversations about the specific things that are going on so that there's more understanding on both sides is at least a first step. And I feel like workplaces can do more to facilitate those kinds of conversations and create informal settings in which that other perspective is, rather than making presumptions, right? And I think the kind of passive aggressive backlash is really pernicious, and that kind of, the man will just kind of have that doubt, like, oh, that's just she's just getting this extra thing, without actually talking it out or being educated about why those are being provided and how that is needed for equity. Then all those things fester, right? And then if there's a moment of crisis, then really bad things happen, right? And then that's when you get into situations of violence and other kinds of things. So, I mean, I think, I'm sure I would have to think more about it, but I think there's ways that some of those passive aggressive things can be engaged.
It's also the 6-month maternity leave, which has got a huge backlash, which is supposed to be good.
Helpful.
I think in workplaces, just everybody accepts it because it's what the government has put out. But
right.
Internally, if you listen
well,
to
then you need to expand paternity leave too.
Yeah.
To make that work,
You
you have to
need
expand.
to
You have to
do
do that.
it. It's a
It has to be
huge
parental leave, otherwise it can't just be both ways. Hi.
I just thought I would share some voices that I've had the opportunity to listen to because they're so different from my own. And I found a lot of the comments that you made through the interviews were also very similar. This is more, I guess, the elite side.
Yeah.
For IT, these are engineers,
Yeah.
and women and young women. And when you first asked the question of women empowerment, the question for me is power where?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think, and in listening to some of the young women who are starting off in their careers and are making similar comments like,
Yeah.
I'm here in this job because it gives me some free spending money and it makes me more marriageable.
Yes.
So I can snag a guy who
That's right.
has better salary and income, and then as soon as I get married, I can go home and be with the kids, and that's what I ultimately want. So my voice is like,
Right.
But actually speaking, power where?
Yeah.
Because power in the household is one of the most, I would say, important places
Yes.
to have power.
Absolutely.
So I feel like sometimes maybe these young women are looking at, senior women who are in the career, the few that are there.
Yes.
They're looking at their situations and thinking, that is like a totally raw deal,
Yes.
Because they're not even very powerful in the workplace.
That's
begin
right.
with, and then they still have to deal with all
the stuff at home.
and there's this like constant kind of
shuffling and
all
managing.
that kind of stuff. And they're like, as far as my power is controlled, I'm not talking about extreme cases where women don't have power control over their bodies and things
Right.
like that. But in I would say well-to-do, upper middle class families, they're in a way they're able to etch out their influence and power more effectively in the home in the domestic space, which I don't think should be undervalued than they do in the workspace.
Yeah.
And so my only problem with that was like some of the young women who really, really wanted careers in engineering.
Right.
If you ask me my view on that, I would say it's like 10%.
Right.
Because
Right.
90% of the women are not even necessarily passionate about the forms of work that their parents have chosen for them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that, and I mean, a couple of things to add, right? I mean, when people express aspirations for their own life, we as sociologists think about it as emerging from their social location and their socialization, right? We're all perfectly socialized into the worlds that we inhabit, right? And so if you've already looked ahead and seen like, this is kind of a raw deal, there's no pot of gold at the end of this rainbow, then you are going to put all of your attention in enhancing your position in that domestic sphere. But that could also, what often happens is that ends up being a raw deal too, right? And even in those well-to-do families, you find women, say, not having control over their bodies, being devalued in their place in the home, right? Being devalued in other ways. So I think women may make that bargain early in life and have it not turn out the way that they expect, right? And so I would still come down on the side of, if we don't value women outside the home, then those are connected, right? You can't just choose one over the other, but I understand why women pick one over the other, right? Because those are the conditions that exist, and people understand that, and people are very conscientious about what's possible.
Smitha, did you see the amount of lobbying that went into when Christine Lagarde wanted to become the chairman of the IMF?
Yes.
My goodness, she had to go and, I don't know.
The song and the dance and the...
There was a lot going on behind the curtain.
I bet there was.
Going on well with the kind of this attitude that...
The top brass. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
there was a lot of lobbying.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I look at women... Yeah.
Because, I mean, there's no two doubts about it, no question about the kind of
Qualifications,
potential
yeah.
that she possesses, but just this kind
Now,
of...
now there's an Indian American, Geeta Gopinath, I think. Her name is.
Yeah. She is
Geeta Gopinath or Gopinath.
chief economist.
Oh.
She's the chief economist
That's amazing.
at the IMF.
Wow, I didn't know that.
She's an
I'll look her up.
professor and
Wow. I don't know her.
Also, we have a woman defense minister here in India.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and just to say one more comment about that, which is that, it's wonderful to have women in positions of power, but, if we go back to this thinking about masculinity and femininity, is their leadership style just emulating men doing the same job, or are they bringing something different to it? And I think it's different in different cases. And it has been the case, and this is true in organizational sociology. There's a lot of work, the gender literature has shown that, that when women advance, they tend to socialize themselves into masculine norms in order to move ahead, right? And so in what the kind of rethinking that I'm proposing, what is valued as material to move up would be different, right? And that requires some rethinking. So putting women in positions of power is not necessarily transforming, right, the values that structure the way the workplace works, right? Just to throw another additional thing in.
What would be an ideal situation according to you?
I wish I had the imagination to really spell that out, because I too am perfectly socialized into the world, but I think that we need to ask questions that are structural and fundamental, like how do we decide what work is valued, right? How do we decide who gets a paycheck and how? Those are not questions that we ask because we're trapped in those worlds, right? So I'm right there with you, trapped in that world, but I'm trying to, with the privilege of my position in the academy and sitting and thinking about this a long time, raise the question of what might that look like, and I hope that we can all imagine that together. Right, and I feel like just the fact that we asked that, like, let's start thinking about it. I mean, let's throw out ideas. Let's figure out what that might look like, right?
Universal income is an option.
I think that has to be on the table, and I think like what would then there's all kinds of new debates within the corporation. I think I can imagine what that could look like, which is that there's a very well-known business case for diversity, right? The fact that when women are in the workplace, that they bring a particular set of skills. That argument ends up falling into quite gender-segregated logic, right? Like women are more caring and feminine, and they build good soft skills, and they are better at relationships. They're process-oriented. Men are more aggressive and assertive, and you need both. Well, how about redefining what good management is, such that those things are expected from men and women, right?
Why is it important? Like, why can't men and women have separate sets of skills? Why is that such an issue?
Because it's marginalized both men and women in different ways, right? It prevents both men and women from accessing opportunities that are inconsistent with what they're expected to do based on their, genitalia, gender presentation, which is right? I mean, a woman might have a go conquer aggressive leadership style that may or may not be rewarded. A man may be very process oriented and be able to do a great job with that and would not be rewarded in our current system. Maybe he would because of his masculine privilege or other things, right? But the way in which those things are structured don't allow for full development of either men or women. Yes, that's exactly what that's what I'm trying to say. That we need to reimagine those structures quite differently than we have, and it has to go beyond kind of an individual model. And a lot of corporate women that I talk to, that I interviewed for this project, and even I keep asking them because I'm interested. They kind of come down on this like, well, but the women who really, but the leaders of these some of the diversity programs, and not all of them, but they tend to come down on, well, if women really want it, they can figure it out. They can hustle, get the right childcare. In one recent panel I was in, there was even a comment, something like, behind every man is a powerful woman, but behind every woman is an efficient maid, right? Well, you're just passing on that to another woman, right? And is that what kind of privilege allows you to do that? And would another woman be able to do the same thing with less privilege? No. Right? So, I think there is like a fundamental questioning of structures that we have to engage in, that, we're still quite limited in our imagination, and I include myself in that, but I'm hoping to at least raise the question so that we can think about what would a gender equitable workplace actually look like? What would a home look like where parenting is shared and is not devalued? What would that society look like? I would want to be a part of that, whatever it is. So, yeah.
So it comes back to deconstructing patriarchy and confronting gender norms, which can only happen at a young age primarily. That's what I feel. It's so challenging, difficult to talk to people who are, fully set in their ways. So I don't know, I just feel like the work really needs to happen at the level of children, at rearing children, and also of course in schools, but you can't expect too much of formal education, I think, in that department. But at homes and maybe in informal spaces, there are NGOs that we work with, we work with teenage boys, for instance. Of course, it's not only, the work doesn't need to be done with boys, but there's an organization called Equal Community Foundation that works with young boys in poor slums, urban slums. They've also started working in rural spaces in West Bengal, where there's an informal education that happens over the course of months, 15 weeks, where all aspects of gender and patriarchy is analyzed in ways which they can understand.
Right.
So
those are
their concerns.
No, absolutely. And I think now we're getting into okay, well, what is the basis of gender? And socialization is one theory, but it's not the only one, because if it were all socialization, then we would have no transgender people, but we do, right? There's all kinds of, any theory that you come doesn't explain all of it. And we often find that gender is far more malleable than we think, right? It's not that people are set forever in their gender norms. We already live in a world where people are finding that they are able to tweak their gender presentation it's not that hard, right? I mean, now I don't know if it's come here, but in the U.S., right, like now pronouns are up for grabs, and people are determining what kinds of pronouns, and everybody, hemmed and hawed about it, and now, I use they very easily. You just have to get used to it, and it's actually not that hard, right? I didn't grow up with it, but, it's awkward a little bit, and then you figure it out. I think that our level of adaptability to new gender norms is more malleable than we tend to give it's not as set in stone as we might think. That said, right, the level of gendered socialization that happens certainly in the US is really crazy. Like it's really, I almost think that it's like worse than when I was growing up or a generation ago. It starts really, really young. Yeah, it's really pervasive. Everything that a girl does being interpreted as a result of her gender, everything that a boy does being interpreted as a result of his, and overlooking the things that don't conform to that in one way or the other. And I've seen that, as a parent, I've seen that happening even among folks whom I consider allies, having those kinds of expectations. So it's a thorny problem, but there's hope, I think.
On that note of hope. Thanks, Smitha. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you all.
For your future books.
Thank you.
Thank
you all for the great conversation.
To share.
Yeah, when that Microfinance book is done.
Yes.
Hopefully soon.